Tonight, we'll be diving deep beneath the waves of the Hoenn region, exploring the mysterious story of Team Aqua and their devotion to the endless sea. Find a comfortable position, let your breathing slow like gentle tides, and allow your mind to drift as we uncover the secrets of these ocean guardians. From their humble beginnings to their legendary awakening, every wave of their story will carry you deeper into tranquil rest. There's no need to focus too intensely. Just let the rhythm of their tale wash over you like moonlit waters lapping against a peaceful shore. In the coastal regions of Hoenn, where the endless expanse of ocean meets rugged cliffs and sandy beaches, a young man named Archie spent countless hours watching the waves. Unlike most people who saw the sea as simply a barrier to cross or a resource to exploit, Archie perceived something profound in those rolling waters. He understood that the ocean was not just a body of water, but the very cradle of life itself, the source from which all living creatures emerged millions of years ago. Every morning, he would stand on the shores near Slateport City, observing how Tentacool danced through the surf and how Wingull rode the ocean breezes with effortless grace. Archie's fascination with marine life began during his childhood, when he discovered an injured Carvana washed up on the beach after a particularly violent storm. Rather than leaving the fierce-looking Pokémon to its fate, he carefully nursed it back to health, spending weeks feeding it and ensuring its wounds healed properly. During those quiet days of recovery, Archie formed a bond not just with that single Pokémon, but with the vast ecosystem it represented. He began to see the interconnected web of life that existed beneath the waves, how every creature played a vital role in maintaining the delicate balance of the marine environment. As Archie grew older, his concern for the ocean deepened into something approaching reverence. He witnessed the gradual encroachment of human development along Hoenn's coastlines, watching as pristine beaches were transformed into industrial complexes and shipping ports. The Devon Corporation's expansion particularly troubled him, as their mining operations and technological developments seemed to prioritize profit over environmental protection. He saw how pollution from these facilities affected the water quality, how the natural migration patterns of water-type Pokémon were disrupted by increasing boat traffic and underwater construction projects. The turning point came when Archie discovered a massive die-off of Corsola in a reef system near Pacific Log Town. The beautiful coral Pokémon, known for their ability to create underwater gardens that supported countless other species, were bleaching and dying at an alarming rate. Local scientists attributed the phenomenon to rising water temperatures and chemical runoff from nearby development projects. But their warnings fell on deaf ears among government officials and corporate executives, who saw the ocean primarily as an economic resource rather than a living ecosystem deserving of protection. It was during this period of growing environmental awareness that Archie began to attract like-minded individuals who shared his passion for marine conservation. The first to join him was a former marine biologist named Shelley, whose research into the effects of industrial pollution on water-type Pokémon had been repeatedly dismissed by academic institutions funded by major corporations. Shelley brought scientific credibility to Archie's environmental concerns, providing detailed data about the declining health of Hoen's marine ecosystems and the urgent need for protective action. Matt, a former sailor who had spent years navigating Hoen's waters, joined their growing circle after witnessing firsthand how shipping lanes were destroying underwater habitats. His practical knowledge of ocean currents and maritime operations proved invaluable as the group began to organize more sophisticated interventions to protect marine environments. Matt's rough exterior and no-nonsense approach to problem-solving balanced perfectly with Archie's passionate idealism and Shelley's scientific precision. The group's early activities focused on peaceful protest and public education. They organized beach cleanups, distributed information about the importance of marine conservation, and attempted to work within existing legal frameworks to protect threatened coastal areas. However, their efforts were consistently thwarted by powerful corporate interests and government officials who prioritized economic development over environmental protection. Permits for conservation projects were denied. Environmental impact studies were ignored or suppressed, and their peaceful demonstrations were often dispersed by security forces hired by the very companies they were protesting. Gradually, Archie and his followers began to realize that conventional approaches to environmental activism were insufficient to address the scale and urgency of the threats facing Hoen's marine ecosystems. The destruction was happening too quickly, and the political and economic systems seemed designed to prevent meaningful change. It was during this period of frustration and disillusionment that the group began to consider more direct action as a means of protecting the ocean and its inhabitants. The transformation from environmental activists to what would eventually become Team Aqua was not sudden, but rather a gradual evolution driven by necessity and deepening conviction. They began by conducting small-scale operations to disrupt the most destructive industrial activities, carefully targeting projects that posed immediate threats to marine life. Their first major intervention involved sabotaging construction equipment being used to build a new oil drilling platform off the coast of Duford Town, an operation that would have devastated a critical breeding ground for several endangered water-type Pokémon species. As their operations became more sophisticated and their membership grew, the group began to adopt the organizational structure and aesthetic that would eventually define Team Aqua. The choice to embrace a pirate-inspired theme was both practical and symbolic. Practically, it helped them blend in among the many sailors and maritime workers who populated Hoen's coastal communities. Symbolically, it represented their rejection of conventional authority and their commitment to operating outside the legal frameworks that had failed to protect the ocean. The distinctive blue and white uniforms worn by Team Aqua members were designed to evoke both the colors of the sea and the traditional garb of seafaring peoples throughout history. The bandanas and sailor-style clothing served multiple purposes, providing practical protection from sun and salt spray during maritime operations, while also creating a strong visual identity that helped build group cohesion and public recognition. The skull and crossbones symbol they adopted was modified to include wave patterns, transforming the traditional pirate emblem into something that specifically represented their aquatic focus. Archie's leadership style during these early years was characterized by a combination of passionate conviction and careful planning. Unlike the stereotypical image of pirates as chaotic and undisciplined, he insisted that Team Aqua operate with military precision and clear strategic objectives. Every operation was carefully planned to minimize harm to innocent people and Pokémon while maximizing impact on the industrial activities they were targeting. He understood that their credibility as environmental protectors depended on their ability to demonstrate that they were motivated by genuine concern for marine ecosystems rather than simple criminality or desire for personal gain. The philosophical foundation that Archie established for Team Aqua was deeply rooted in the belief that the ocean represented not just the origin of life, but also its ideal future. He taught his followers that water-type Pokémon possessed a natural wisdom and harmony that land-dwelling creatures had lost through their involvement in human civilization. The sea, in his view, represented a pure and uncorrupted realm where life could flourish without the destructive interference of industrial development and technological advancement. This philosophy gradually evolved into something approaching a religious conviction, with Archie and his most devoted followers beginning to see their mission not just as environmental protection, but as a form of spiritual calling. They believed that by expanding the ocean's influence and reducing the dominance of land-based civilization, they could restore the world to a more natural and harmonious state. This belief system provided the ideological foundation for what would eventually become their most ambitious and dangerous plan: the awakening of the legendary Pokémon Kyogre. During the formative years of Team Aqua, recruitment focused primarily on individuals who had direct experience with marine environments and genuine concern for ocean conservation. Many of their early members were former fishermen, sailors, marine biologists, and coastal residents who had witnessed the degradation of Hoenn waters firsthand. This shared experience created a strong sense of community and purpose within the organization, as every member could point to specific examples of environmental destruction that had motivated their decision to join. The training regimen established for new Team Aqua members emphasized both practical skills and ideological commitment. Recruits learned advanced swimming and diving techniques, navigation and seamanship, marine biology and ecology, and the care and training of water-type Pokémonde. Equally important was their education in Team Aqua's environmental philosophy and their understanding of the historical and mythological significance of the ocean in Hoenn culture. As Team Aqua's reputation grew and their operations became more ambitious, they began to attract attention from both supporters and opponents throughout the Hoenn region. Environmental groups praised their willingness to take direct action where conventional activism had failed, while corporate interests and government officials denounced them as dangerous extremists, threatening economic stability and public safety. This polarized response only strengthened the resolve of Team Aqua members, who saw the intensity of the opposition as proof that their activities were having a meaningful impact on the forces destroying marine ecosystems. The funding for Team Aqua's operations came from a variety of sources, reflecting both their practical needs and their ideological commitments. Some resources were obtained through legitimate means, including donations from sympathetic environmental groups and the personal savings of committed members who were willing to sacrifice their own financial security for the cause. However, as their operations became more sophisticated and expensive, they were forced to engage in activities that existed in legal gray areas or crossed the line into outright theft. Their approach to these morally ambiguous activities was carefully rationalized through their environmental philosophy. They argued that corporations that were destroying marine ecosystems had no legitimate claim to the resources they were using for destructive purposes, and that taking those resources to fund conservation efforts was not theft, but rather a form of environmental justice. This reasoning allowed them to maintain their self-image as principled environmental protectors, even as they engaged in increasingly criminal behavior. The Pokémon teams favored by Team Aqua members reflected both their practical needs and their philosophical commitments. Water-type Pokémon like Carvania, Sharpedo, Tentacool, and Tentacruel were prized not only for their utility in aquatic operations, but also for their perceived embodiment of the ocean's power and wisdom. These Pokémon were seen as partners and allies rather than tools, and their care and training was considered a sacred responsibility that connected Team Aqua members to the marine ecosystem they were sworn to protect. As Archie and his followers prepared for increasingly ambitious operations, they began to research the ancient legends and myths surrounding Hoenn legendary Pokémonday. The stories of Kyogre, the massive whale-like creature said to have created the very oceans themselves, captivated Archie's imagination and provided a new direction for Team Aqua's ultimate goal. If they could somehow awaken this legendary being and harness its power, they believed they could restore the ocean to its rightful dominance over the world, creating a paradise where marine life could flourish without the destructive interference of land-based civilization. As Team Aqua evolved from a small group of environmental activists into a sophisticated organization, the need for clear leadership and structure became increasingly apparent. Archie's natural charisma and unwavering dedication to their oceanic cause made him the obvious choice to lead this growing movement, but his approach to leadership was far more nuanced and thoughtful than one might expect from someone who had embraced the pirate aesthetic. Unlike the stereotypical image of a captain ruling through fear and intimidation, Archie led through inspiration and shared conviction, creating a sense of family among his followers that went far deeper than mere organizational loyalty. The foundation of Archie's leadership philosophy rested on his belief that every member of Team Aqua was a guardian of the sea, regardless of their rank or specific role within the organization. He understood that their mission required not just obedience, but genuine commitment and understanding from every individual involved. During the quiet evening hours, When the team gathered in their coastal hideaways, Archie would often share stories of ancient mariners and their deep connection to the ocean, weaving together mythology, marine biology, and environmental philosophy in ways that helped his followers understand their place within a much larger narrative about the relationship between humanity and the sea. Archie's personal charisma was perhaps most evident in his ability to make each team member feel valued and understood. He possessed an almost supernatural ability to remember details about individual members' backgrounds, their personal motivations for joining Team Aqua, and their specific skills and interests. When speaking with a former fisherman, he would discuss the traditional knowledge passed down through generations of seafaring families. With a marine biologist, he could engage in sophisticated conversations about ecosystem dynamics and species conservation. This personal attention created deep bonds of loyalty and helped maintain morale even during the most challenging operations. The selection of Matt as Archie's primary lieutenant reflected both practical considerations and the leader's understanding of the diverse skills needed to run an effective organization. Matt's background as a sailor provided him with extensive knowledge of maritime operations, navigation, and the practical challenges of coordinating activities across Hoen's vast coastal regions. His gruff exterior and no-nonsense approach to problem-solving made him an ideal enforcer when discipline was required. But those who worked closely with him knew that beneath his intimidating facade lay a deep sensitivity to the suffering of marine Pokémon and an almost paternal concern for the welfare of his subordinates. Matt's role within Team Aqua extended far beyond simple enforcement of Archie's orders. He served as the primary coordinator for their more dangerous operations, using his intimate knowledge of ocean currents, weather patterns, and shipping schedules to plan activities that would minimize the risk of discovery while maximizing their impact on industrial targets. His ability to think tactically and anticipate potential problems made him invaluable during the planning stages of their operations, while his personal bravery and skill in battle made him a formidable opponent when conflicts became unavoidable. The relationship between Matt and Archie was built on mutual respect and complementary strengths rather than simple hierarchy. While Archie provided the vision and inspiration that drove Team Aqua forward, Matt ensured that their idealistic goals could be translated into practical action. During planning sessions, Matt would often challenge Archie's more ambitious proposals, forcing the leader to consider potential risks and unintended consequences that might compromise their mission or endanger their members. This dynamic tension between idealism and pragmatism helped keep Team Aqua focused and effective, even as their operations became increasingly complex and dangerous. Shelley's position within Team Aqua's leadership structure reflected both her scientific expertise and her unique perspective as someone who had witnessed the environmental destruction they were fighting from within the academic and corporate establishments. Her background as a marine biologist provided crucial credibility to their environmental claims, while her experience with institutional politics helped the organization navigate the complex relationships between government agencies, corporate interests, and environmental groups. Unlike Matt, whose approach to problems was typically direct and confrontational, Shelley preferred subtlety and strategic thinking, often identifying opportunities for Team Aqua to achieve their goals through careful manipulation of existing systems rather than brute force. The scientific knowledge that Shelley brought to Team Aqua went far beyond simple data collection and analysis. She understood the intricate relationships between different marine ecosystems, the complex ways that pollution and development affected water quality and species health, and the long-term implications of the environmental trends they were trying to combat. This knowledge informed every aspect of Team Aqua's operations, from the selection of targets for their sabotage activities to the development of their ultimate plan to awaken Kyogre and restore the ocean's dominance over the world. Shelley's role as the voice of scientific reason within Team Aqua's leadership also made her the most likely to express doubts about their more extreme plans. As their operations escalated and their goals became more ambitious, she found herself increasingly concerned about the potential unintended consequences of their actions. Her understanding of ecological systems made her acutely aware that even well-intentioned interventions could have catastrophic results if they disrupted delicate natural balances. These concerns would eventually prove prophetic, but during the organization's growth phase, her warnings were often overshadowed by the passionate conviction of Archie and the tactical focus of Matt. The recruitment process for Team Aqua was carefully designed to identify individuals who possessed both the practical skills needed for their operations and the ideological commitment required to sustain them through the moral ambiguities and physical dangers they would face. Unlike criminal organizations that recruited primarily based on desperation or greed, Team Aqua sought out people who had genuine connections to marine environments and personal reasons to support their environmental mission. This approach resulted in a membership that was unusually cohesive and motivated, but it also limited their ability to rapidly expand their ranks when operational demands increased. The typical Team Aqua recruit was someone who had spent significant time working on or near the ocean and had witnessed firsthand the environmental degradation that motivated the organization's activities. Former fishermen who had seen their traditional fishing grounds depleted by industrial pollution, sailors who had watched pristine coastal areas transformed into shipping facilities, and marine researchers whose conservation efforts had been thwarted by corporate interests, all found natural homes within Team Aqua's ranks. This shared background of environmental loss created strong bonds among members and provided a solid foundation for the trust and cooperation essential to their dangerous work. The training regimen established for new Team Aqua members was comprehensive and demanding, reflecting Archie's understanding that their mission required both physical capability and intellectual sophistication. New recruits spent weeks learning advanced swimming and diving techniques, often training in challenging conditions that simulated the environments they would encounter during actual operations. They studied marine biology and ecology, not just to support their environmental mission, but to develop the deep appreciation for ocean life that Archie considered essential to true membership in Team Aqua. Navigation and seamanship formed another crucial component of the training program, as most Team Aqua operations required the ability to move safely and efficiently across Hoen's coastal waters. Recruits learned to read weather patterns and ocean currents, to operate various types of boats and submersible vehicles, and to navigate by both traditional methods and modern technology. This maritime expertise not only supported their operational effectiveness, but also deepened their connection to the seafaring traditions that informed Team Aqua's cultural identity. Perhaps most importantly, new members underwent extensive education in Team Aqua's environmental philosophy and their understanding of the historical and mythological significance of the ocean in Hoenn culture. This ideological training was designed not just to ensure loyalty, but to help recruits understand their place within what Archie portrayed as an ancient struggle between the forces of oceanic harmony and terrestrial destruction. By the time they completed their training, new Team Aqua members saw themselves not merely as environmental activists or even criminals, but as guardians of a sacred trust that connected them to the very origins of life itself. The internal structure of Team Aqua reflected both practical organizational needs and Archie's commitment to maintaining the personal connections that held the group together. Rather than establishing a rigid military hierarchy, he created a system that balanced clear chains of command with opportunities for individual initiative and creativity. Lower-ranking members were encouraged to propose ideas and participate in planning discussions, while senior operatives were expected to mentor newcomers and ensure that Team Aqua's values and traditions were passed down to each new generation of recruits. The grunt-level positions within Team Aqua were filled by individuals who provided the numerical strength and basic skills needed for large-scale operations. Despite their lower rank, these members were treated with respect and given opportunities to advance based on their demonstrated competence and commitment. Many grunts specialized in particular areas, such as underwater demolition, electronic surveillance, or Pokémon training, developing expertise that made them valuable contributors to the organization's more sophisticated operations. The funding mechanisms that supported Team Aqua's activities reflected both their practical needs and their moral flexibility in pursuing their environmental goals. Legitimate sources of income included donations from sympathetic environmental groups, proceeds from the sale of marine research data collected during their operations, and the personal contributions of wealthy members who were willing to sacrifice their own financial security for the cause. However, as their operations became more ambitious and expensive, these legitimate sources proved insufficient to meet their growing needs. The transition toward more questionable funding methods was gradual and carefully rationalized through Team Aqua's environmental philosophy. They began by targeting corporations and individuals who were directly involved in activities that threatened marine ecosystems, arguing that taking resources from these sources was simply a form of environmental justice. Equipment stolen from industrial sites could be repurposed for conservation efforts, while financial assets obtained through various means could fund operations that would ultimately protect ocean life from destruction. The Pokémon teams favored by Team Aqua members reflected both their practical, operational needs and their deep philosophical commitment to marine life. Water-type Pokémon were naturally preferred, not only for their utility in aquatic environments, but also for their perceived embodiment of oceanic wisdom and harmony. Carvanha and Sharpedo were particularly prized for their combination of fierce loyalty and devastating power in battle, while Tentacool and Tentacruel provided both offensive capabilities and utility functions such as underwater transportation and communication. The relationship between Team Aqua members and their Pokémon went far beyond the typical trainer-partner dynamic. These creatures were seen as fellow guardians of the sea, allies in a sacred mission rather than tools to be used for human purposes. Team Aqua members spent countless hours studying the natural behaviors and needs of their Pokémon partners, learning to communicate with them in ways that honored their intelligence and autonomy. This respectful approach to Pokémon training often resulted in unusually strong bonds and exceptional performance in both battle and operational contexts. The care and training of Pokémon within Team Aqua was considered not just a practical necessity, but a spiritual discipline that connected members to the marine ecosystem they were sworn to protect. Training sessions often took place in natural aquatic environments rather than artificial facilities, allowing both trainers and Pokémon to develop their skills while remaining connected to the ocean's rhythms and energies. Advanced members were expected to develop almost telepathic connections with their Pokémon partners, enabling coordination and communication that went far beyond simple command following. As Team Aqua's reputation grew throughout the Hoenn region, they began to attract both supporters and opponents whose reactions reflected the polarized nature of environmental politics in the area. Grassroots environmental groups praised their willingness to take direct action where conventional activism had failed, while corporate interests and government officials denounced them as dangerous extremists whose activities threatened economic stability and public safety. This polarized response only strengthened the resolve of Team Aqua members, who interpreted the intensity of opposition as proof that their efforts were having meaningful impact on the forces they were fighting. The public relations challenges faced by Team Aqua reflected the inherent difficulties of maintaining popular support while engaging in increasingly criminal activities. Archie understood that their long-term success depended on maintaining at least tacit support from coastal communities that depended on healthy marine ecosystems, so he made careful efforts to ensure that their operations targeted only industrial and corporate interests rather than ordinary citizens. When possible, Team Aqua members would explain their actions to local residents, emphasizing their commitment to protecting the ocean environments that supported traditional livelihoods. The symbol and imagery adopted by Team Aqua served multiple functions within their organizational culture. The modified skull and crossbones that incorporated wave patterns provided a visual identity that was both intimidating to opponents and inspiring to members, while the blue and white color scheme reinforced their connection to marine environments. The pirate aesthetic helped them blend in among the diverse maritime communities of Hoenn, while also expressing their rejection of conventional authority. and their commitment to operating outside legal frameworks that had failed to protect ocean ecosystems. The uniforms worn by Team Aqua members were designed to be both practical and symbolic, providing protection from the harsh marine environments where they operated, while also creating a strong sense of group identity. The bandanas and sailor-style clothing served functional purposes during maritime operations, protecting members from sun, salt spray, and wind, while allowing for freedom of movement during physical activities. At the same time, these distinctive garments helped create the sense of belonging and shared purpose that was essential to maintaining morale during dangerous and morally ambiguous operations. The transformation of Team Aqua from environmental activists to active operatives began with small, carefully planned interventions designed to disrupt the most egregious threats to marine ecosystems, while avoiding actions that might harm innocent people or Pokémon. Archie understood that their credibility as protectors of the sea depended on demonstrating restraint and precision in their early operations, showing the world that they were motivated by genuine environmental concern rather than simple criminal impulses or desire for personal gain. These initial activities served multiple purposes, allowing new members to develop their operational skills, while building the organization's reputation and establishing the moral framework that would guide their future actions. The first major operation undertaken by Team Aqua targeted a chemical processing facility near Duford Town that had been secretly dumping industrial waste into coastal waters for several months. Local fishermen had reported massive die-offs of Magikarp and Tentacool in the area, but government inspectors had repeatedly cleared the facility of any wrongdoing, despite overwhelming evidence of environmental damage. Shelley's scientific analysis of water samples confirmed the presence of toxic compounds that were slowly poisoning the entire ecosystem, creating dead zones where marine life could no longer survive. Rather than staging a dramatic confrontation that might result in violence or extensive property damage, Team Aqua chose a more subtle approach that reflected their growing sophistication as an organization. Under cover of darkness, small teams of operatives infiltrated the facility and carefully disabled the pumps and filtration systems responsible for the illegal dumping, while simultaneously installing monitoring equipment that would document future violations. The operation was completed without detection, and the facility's managers found themselves unable to continue their illegal activities without risking exposure of their crimes. The success of this first major intervention provided a template for many of Team Aqua's subsequent operations during their early period. They focused on gathering solid evidence of environmental crimes, then taking precise action to stop the illegal activities, while ensuring that the responsible parties would face public scrutiny for their actions. This approach allowed them to position themselves as environmental defenders rather than simple criminals, building support among coastal communities that depended on healthy marine ecosystems, while avoiding the kind of escalation that might provoke a massive law enforcement response. Another significant early operation involved the disruption of an unauthorized deep-sea mining project that threatened to destroy a vast underwater canyon system south of Slateport City. The mining operation, conducted by a subsidiary of the Devon Corporation, was extracting rare minerals from the seafloor using techniques that created massive sediment plumes and acoustic disturbances that drove away the water-type Pokémon that had inhabited the area for generations. Environmental impact studies had been suppressed or manipulated to minimize the apparent damage, while local Pokémon researchers who attempted to document the destruction found their funding cut and their access to the area restricted. Team Aqua's response to this threat demonstrated their growing ability to coordinate complex operations across multiple domains. While Matt led a team of divers who planted carefully designed charges to disable the mining equipment without harming marine life, Shelley worked with sympathetic scientists to document the environmental damage and prepare evidence for eventual public release. Meanwhile, Archie and other team members conducted surveillance on corporate executives and government officials involved in authorizing the project, gathering information that could be used to expose the corruption and negligence that had allowed the destruction to continue. The operation culminated in a dramatic nighttime raid that saw Team Aqua operatives emerging from the depths like vengeful sea spirits to disable the mining operation's key equipment. The carefully placed explosives rendered the mining vessels inoperable without causing injuries to their crews, while the simultaneous release of environmental documentation created a public relations disaster for the Devon Corporation that forced them to suspend the project indefinitely. The success of this operation established Team Aqua's reputation as a force capable of challenging even the most powerful corporate interests when marine environments were threatened. As Team Aqua's capabilities and confidence grew, they began to target a wider range of activities that posed threats to ocean ecosystems, often focusing on projects that were technically legal but environmentally destructive. Coastal development projects that destroyed critical nursery habitats for young Pokémon, shipping operations that disrupted migration routes, and industrial facilities that degraded water quality all became potential targets for their intervention. The organization's growing expertise in underwater operations, electronic surveillance, and strategic planning allowed them to conduct increasingly sophisticated campaigns that combined direct action with information warfare and public pressure. The theft of the Devon goods that would later become central to their conflict with trainers and law enforcement began as a relatively minor operation designed to gather intelligence about corporate plans for expanded maritime development. The goods in question included technical specifications for advanced submarine technology that could potentially be used for deep-sea mining or underwater construction projects, along with research data about rare Pokémon species that inhabited the deepest parts of Hoen's ocean trenches. From Team Aqua's perspective, preventing this technology from being used for destructive purposes justified the risk of theft, especially since the information could also be valuable for their own conservation efforts. The decision to target the Devon Corporation worker in Petalburg Woods reflected both opportunity and strategic thinking on the part of Team Aqua operatives. Intelligence gathered through their surveillance networks had indicated that sensitive materials would be transported through the area, and the relative isolation of the forest location made it an ideal site for an interception operation that could be completed without significant risk of civilian casualties or major law enforcement response. The operation was intended to be quick and clean, with the corporate worker left unharmed while Team Aqua made off with materials that could provide crucial intelligence about threats to marine environments. However, the unexpected intervention of a young trainer complicated what should have been a routine operation, forcing the Team Aqua operative to engage in a Pokémon battle that drew unwanted attention to their activities. The defeat of their grunt and subsequent recovery of the stolen goods represented a significant setback for the organization, not only because they lost access to potentially valuable intelligence, but also because the incident marked the beginning of their ongoing conflict with trainers who would consistently interfere with their operations. This early encounter established a pattern that would plague Team Aqua throughout their subsequent activities, as they found their carefully planned operations repeatedly disrupted by the unpredictable intervention of skilled trainers and their Pokémon partners. The subsequent theft attempt at the Devon Corporation headquarters in Rustboro City demonstrated both Team Aqua's persistence and their growing willingness to take greater risks in pursuit of their goals. The decision to launch a direct assault on a heavily secured corporate facility represented a significant escalation from their earlier, more subtle operations, reflecting both their growing confidence in their abilities and their increasing desperation to obtain information about threats to marine ecosystems. The operation required careful planning and coordination, with multiple team members working together to overcome security systems and corporate defenses that had been specifically designed to prevent exactly this type of intrusion. The failure of this operation, like the earlier incident in Petalburg Woods, was largely due to the unexpected intervention of the same young trainer who had disrupted their initial theft attempt. This pattern of interference began to convince some Team Aqua members that trainers represented a fundamental obstacle to their environmental mission, since even well-meaning individuals seemed unable to understand the urgent necessity of their actions. The repeated defeats also highlighted the need for better intelligence and more sophisticated planning, leading to increased emphasis on surveillance and reconnaissance activities that would eventually draw them into conflict with a wider range of opponents. The infiltration of the Oceanic Museum in Slateport City represented a different approach to information gathering that reflected Team Aqua's growing sophistication as an intelligence organization. Rather than attempting another direct theft, they chose to establish a presence within the museum itself, taking advantage of the institution's research facilities and archives to gather information about marine ecosystems, underwater geography, and historical accounts of legendary Pokémon. The museum's extensive collection of oceanographic data and maritime artifacts provided a wealth of information that could support both their ongoing conservation efforts and their developing plans for more ambitious operations. The presence of multiple Team Aqua operatives within the museum, disguised as tourists and researchers, allowed them to conduct detailed surveillance of museum staff and visitors while systematically copying or photographing materials that might prove useful for their mission. Their particular interest in exhibits related to submarine technology and deep-sea exploration reflected their growing awareness that achieving their ultimate goals would require capabilities that went far beyond simple sabotage and protest activities. The information gathered during this operation would prove crucial to their later efforts to obtain submarine technology and plan their approach to the seafloor caverns where Kyogre was believed to rest. The discovery of their museum operation by Captain Stern and the subsequent confrontation with the young trainer, who had become their persistent nemesis, marked another significant setback for Team Aqua's intelligence gathering efforts. However, the encounter also provided them with valuable information about Captain Stern's submarine project and its potential applications for deep-sea exploration. This intelligence would prove crucial for their later decision to target Stern's submarine technology, as they realized that his underwater exploration capabilities could provide the means to reach areas of the ocean that had previously been inaccessible to human intervention. Throughout these early operations, Team Aqua demonstrated a consistent pattern of careful planning, followed by execution that was often disrupted by unexpected variables, particularly the intervention of skilled trainers who seemed to appear at the most inconvenient moments. These setbacks taught the organization valuable lessons about the need for better contingency planning and more flexible operational approaches, while also highlighting the importance of maintaining public support for their environmental mission. The repeated encounters with the same young trainer began to take on an almost mythical quality within Team Aqua's ranks, as members began to see these battles as tests of their dedication to their oceanic cause. The intelligence gathered through these early operations provided Team Aqua with crucial information about the scope and scale of the threats facing Hoen's marine ecosystems, while also revealing potential opportunities for more dramatic interventions that could achieve their conservation goals more effectively. The technical specifications obtained from Devon Corporation facilities, combined with oceanographic data from the museum and field observations from their own surveillance activities, began to paint a picture of how advanced technology might be used to access and potentially awaken the legendary Pokémon, whose power could restore the ocean's dominance over terrestrial environments. As Team Aqua's operations became more frequent and ambitious, they began to attract increased attention from law enforcement agencies and corporate security forces, leading to a gradual escalation in the sophistication of their operational planning and execution. The organization invested heavily in training and equipment that would allow them to maintain their effectiveness despite increased opposition, while also developing new techniques for avoiding detection and managing the risks associated with their increasingly criminal activities. This period of growth and adaptation prepared them for the much more ambitious operations that would define their later activities as they moved from relatively small-scale environmental activism toward the grandiose plan to awaken Kyogre and transform the world according to their oceanic vision. The relationships formed between Team Aqua members during these early operations created bonds of trust and mutual dependence that would prove crucial during the more dangerous phases of their mission. The shared experience of risk and the common commitment to protecting marine environments helped forge a sense of unity and purpose that transcended the typical hierarchical relationships found in criminal organizations, creating instead a community of individuals who genuinely believed in their cause and were willing to sacrifice personal safety and legal standing for the greater good of the ocean ecosystem they had sworn to protect. As Team Aqua's operations grew in scope and ambition, Archie found himself drawn deeper into the ancient legends and myths that spoke of Hoen's creation, particularly the stories surrounding Kyogre, the massive, legendary Pokémon said to have expanded the seas and shaped the very foundation of the region's geography. These weren't merely curious tales to pass the time during long nights at sea, but rather what Archie began to perceive as historical accounts of a golden age when the ocean held its rightful dominance over the world before the gradual encroachment of land-based civilization disrupted the natural balance that had allowed marine life to flourish in perfect harmony. The more Archie studied these ancient stories, the more convinced he became that Kyogre represented not just a powerful Pokémon, but the embodiment of oceanic wisdom and the key to restoring the world to its intended state. According to the oldest legends preserved in the archives of various temples and research institutions throughout Hoenn, Kyogre possessed the power to expand the seas without limit, creating vast aquatic realms where water-type Pokémon could thrive without interference from terrestrial development or human industrial activity. These stories described a time when the ocean covered most of the world, supporting diverse ecosystems that had been lost to the gradual expansion of land masses and the corresponding growth of civilizations that saw the sea merely as a resource to be exploited rather than a sacred realm to be protected. Shelley's scientific expertise proved invaluable in analyzing these mythological accounts, as she was able to identify consistent patterns in the geological and climatological details that suggested the legends might contain elements of actual historical truth. Her research into ancient climate patterns and sea level changes revealed evidence of periods in Hoenn's distant past when ocean levels had indeed been dramatically higher, supporting ecosystems that bore striking resemblances to those described in the Kyogre legends. The correlation between mythological accounts and scientific evidence began to convince even the most skeptical Team Aqua members that their mission might involve more than simple environmental activism. The technical challenges of locating and potentially awakening a legendary Pokémon that had been dormant for countless centuries required Team Aqua to develop new capabilities and expertise far beyond anything they had needed for their previous operations. The ancient texts suggested that Kyogre rested somewhere in the deepest parts of Hoenn's ocean trenches, in caverns that could only be reached using advanced submarine technology and specialized diving equipment. This realization marked a turning point in Team Aqua's strategic planning as they began to shift their focus from reactive environmental protection toward the proactive goal of obtaining the resources necessary to reach Kyogre's resting place. The Cave of Origin, mentioned in several of the most detailed legendary accounts, became a particular focus of Team Aqua's research efforts. According to these sources, The cave represented a kind of sacred nexus, where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds became permeable, allowing for direct communication with legendary Pokémon and potentially enabling their awakening from ages of slumber. The cave's connection to Sutopolis City, built within an ancient crater that showed clear signs of legendary Pokémon activity, suggested that the entire area might serve as a kind of focal point for the primordial forces that had shaped Hoenn's geography. However, the legends also spoke of powerful artifacts that were necessary to safely approach and communicate with Kyogre, most notably the red and blue orbs that were said to contain fragments of the legendary Pokémon's essence and serve as conduits for their tremendous power. These orbs, according to the ancient accounts, had been created during the great battles between Kyogre and Groudon that had shaped the earliest periods of Hoenn's geological history, and they retained the ability to influence the legendary Pokémon even across vast distances and extended periods of dormancy. The research into these artifacts led Team Aqua to Mount Pyre, a sacred site that had served as a repository for items of spiritual and historical significance for centuries. The mountain's role as a burial ground and memorial site had made it a natural location for preserving the most important relics from Hoenn's ancient past, including objects that might date back to the legendary battles described in the oldest myths. The prospect of obtaining the orbs from Mount Pyre became central to Team Aqua's long-term planning, as they realized that these artifacts would likely be essential for any attempt to awaken Kyogre and harness its power for their environmental goals. As Team Aqua's research progressed, Archie began to develop a comprehensive vision of how awakening Kyogre could address the environmental crises that had motivated their organization's formation. In his increasingly detailed plans, the legendary Pokémon's power to expand the seas would not only create vast new aquatic habitats for marine life, but would also force human civilization to adopt more sustainable relationships with ocean ecosystems. The flooding of coastal industrial areas would eliminate many of the pollution sources that threatened marine environments, while the expansion of oceanic territory would provide space for water-type Pokémon populations to recover from the damage inflicted by human development. This vision of environmental restoration through legendary intervention appealed strongly to Team Aqua members who had become frustrated with the slow pace of conventional conservation efforts and the apparent inability of legal and political systems to address the scale and urgency of the threats facing marine ecosystems. The prospect of achieving through Kyogre's power what seemed impossible through human institutions provided both hope and justification for the increasingly extreme measures that would be necessary to reach and awaken the legendary Pokémonday. The strategic implications of the Kyogre plan required Team Aqua to completely restructure their operational priorities and resource allocation. Instead of focusing primarily on disrupting specific industrial activities or gathering intelligence about particular threats, they began to concentrate their efforts on developing the capabilities necessary for deep-sea exploration and legendary Pokémon interaction. This shift required significant investments in specialized equipment, advanced training for key personnel, and the development of new operational procedures that would allow them to function effectively in the extreme environments where Kyogre was believed to rest. The submarine technology that would eventually become central to their plans represented the most significant technical challenge Team Aqua had ever attempted to address. The depths where Kyogre was believed to reside were far beyond the reach of conventional diving equipment, requiring sophisticated pressure-resistant vehicles capable of extended underwater operation in some of the most hostile environments on Earth. The research and development necessary to create or obtain such technology pushed Team Aqua into new realms of industrial espionage and technical acquisition that went far beyond their previous activities. Captain Stern's submarine project, discovered through their intelligence-gathering operations, appeared to offer a potential solution to their technological needs. Stern's reputation as an innovative marine engineer and his publicly stated commitment to advancing deep-sea exploration capabilities made his work particularly attractive to Team Aqua planners, who understood that their success would depend heavily on having access to the most advanced underwater exploration technology available. The decision to target Stern's project marked another escalation in Team Aqua's willingness to pursue their goals through increasingly direct criminal action. The psychological impact of the Kyogre obsession on Team Aqua's membership was profound and complex, affecting different individuals in various ways depending on their background, personality, and level of commitment to the organization's environmental mission. For some members, the prospect of awakening a legendary Pokémon provided a sense of purpose and hope that sustained them through the moral ambiguities and physical dangers of their increasingly criminal activities. The belief that they were working toward a goal of cosmic significance helped justify the personal sacrifices and ethical compromises that their mission required. However, the grandiose nature of the Kyogre plan also created tensions within Team Aqua's ranks, particularly among members who had joined the organization primarily for its environmental activism rather than its more mystical and ambitious goals. Shelley, in particular, found herself increasingly concerned about the potential consequences of awakening a legendary Pokémon whose power might prove impossible to control or direct toward their intended environmental objectives. Her scientific training made her acutely aware of the risks associated with disrupting natural systems. Even with the best of intentions, the research into Kyogre's capabilities also revealed disturbing aspects of the legendary Pokémon's power that complicated Team Aqua's idealistic vision of oceanic restoration. Ancient accounts described periods when Kyogre's influence had created catastrophic flooding that destroyed not only human settlements, but also terrestrial ecosystems that supported countless non-aquatic Pokémon species. The possibility that awakening Kyogre might result in environmental destruction rather than restoration created moral dilemmas that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying Team Aqua's mission. Despite these concerns, Archie's charismatic leadership and unwavering conviction continued to hold the organization together and drive them toward their increasingly ambitious goals. his ability to articulate a compelling vision of environmental restoration, and his genuine passion for protecting marine life helped maintain team cohesion even as doubts and disagreements began to emerge among the membership. The personal bonds that had developed during Team Aqua's earlier operations provided a foundation of trust and loyalty that sustained the organization through the psychological stresses of planning and preparing for their ultimate operation. The intelligence gathering efforts required to support the Kyogre plan led Team Aqua into increasingly sophisticated surveillance and infiltration operations that demonstrated their growing capabilities as a quasi-military organization. Their research into ancient artifacts, underwater geography, and submarine technology required them to develop expertise in areas ranging from archaeology and marine geology to advanced engineering and industrial espionage. This expansion of their knowledge base and operational capabilities prepared them for the complex challenges they would face in their attempt to reach and awaken the legendary Pokémon Day. The financial resources required to support the Kyogre operation forced Team Aqua to engage in increasingly ambitious criminal activities that went far beyond their earlier environmental activism. The specialized equipment, advanced training, and extended preparation time necessary for their plan required funding levels that could not be met through donations or small-scale theft. This economic pressure contributed to the escalation of their criminal activities and their growing conflict with law enforcement agencies that began to recognize them as a significant threat to public safety and order. As Team Aqua's preparation for the Kyogre operation intensified, the organization began to take on characteristics more typical of a religious cult than a simple environmental activist group. Archie's vision of oceanic restoration became increasingly elaborate and mystical, incorporating elements of ancient mythology and spiritual belief that went far beyond scientific environmentalism. The legendary Pokémon began to be portrayed not just as a powerful ally in their conservation efforts, but as a kind of oceanic deity whose awakening would herald a new age of harmony between humanity and the sea. This quasi-religious dimension of Team Aqua's mission helped maintain morale and commitment among members who might otherwise have been discouraged by the increasing dangers and moral complexities of their activities. The belief that they were serving a cause of transcendent importance provided psychological insulation against doubts and criticisms, while the promise of witnessing the awakening of a legendary Pokémon offered a sense of anticipated fulfillment that sustained them through the long periods of preparation and planning that their operation required. The impact of the Kyogre obsession on Team Aqua's relationship with other environmental groups and potential allies was largely negative, as their increasingly extreme rhetoric and criminal activities alienated many individuals and organizations that might otherwise have supported their conservation efforts. The grandiose nature of their plans and their growing willingness to pursue illegal methods made them appear unstable and dangerous to more conventional environmental activists, limiting their ability to build the broader coalitions that might have been necessary for achieving lasting environmental reforms through legal and political channels. The Weather Institute, nestled among the lush tropical vegetation of Route 119, had always been a place of quiet scientific observation, where researchers monitored the complex atmospheric patterns that shaped Hoen's climate and influenced the delicate balance of its diverse ecosystems. The facility's sophisticated meteorological equipment and extensive databases represented decades of careful data collection about weather phenomena, seasonal variations, and the intricate relationships between atmospheric conditions and the behavior of various Pokémon species. For most of its existence, the Institute had operated as a peaceful research center, contributing valuable knowledge to the scientific community, while remaining largely isolated from the political and environmental conflicts that were increasingly defining the region's development. However, as Team Aqua's plans for awakening Kyogre became more detailed and ambitious, the Institute's research capabilities began to take on new significance in Archie's strategic thinking. The ancient legends surrounding the legendary Pokémon consistently described dramatic weather changes accompanying its appearances, with accounts of torrential rains that could last for weeks or months, massive storms that reshaped coastlines, and atmospheric disturbances that affected climate patterns across vast geographic areas. Understanding these phenomena and their potential implications became crucial for Team Aqua's planning, as they needed to anticipate the environmental consequences of their actions and prepare for the massive changes that Kyogre's awakening might bring to the region. Shelley's scientific background made her particularly aware of the importance of the Weather Institute's data for their mission, and she began to develop detailed plans for obtaining access to the facility's research archives and monitoring equipment. The Institute's records contained not only current meteorological data, but also historical information about unusual weather patterns that might correlate with legendary Pokémon activity in the past. By analyzing these patterns, Team Aqua hoped to identify the specific atmospheric conditions that might indicate successful contact with Kyogre, while also developing strategies for managing the dramatic climate changes that would likely accompany the legendary Pokémon's return to active influence over the region's weather systems. The decision to infiltrate the Weather Institute represented a significant escalation in Team Aqua's willingness to target civilian research facilities, marking a departure from their earlier focus on industrial and corporate targets that were directly involved in environmentally destructive activities. The researchers at the Institute were generally sympathetic to environmental causes and had often published studies documenting the negative impacts of industrial development on regional climate patterns. However, Archie and his followers had become convinced that their mission was too important to be constrained by concerns about targeting innocent scientists, especially when those scientists possessed information that could be crucial for saving the ocean ecosystems they had sworn to protect. The infiltration itself was carried out with characteristic Team Aqua precision and planning, taking advantage of the Institute's relatively modest security measures and the trusting nature of its research staff. Rather than staging a violent assault that might damage valuable equipment or harm the researchers, Team Aqua operatives posed as visiting scientists and graduate students conducting legitimate research projects. This approach allowed them to gain access to sensitive areas of the facility, while maintaining the appearance of normal academic activity, reducing the risk of triggering security responses that might interfere with their information gathering objectives. Matt coordinated the operation with his usual attention to tactical detail, positioning team members throughout the facility to monitor staff movements and ensure that their activities would not be detected or interrupted. The operatives assigned to the mission had been carefully selected for their ability to blend in with the Institute's academic environment, and several had legitimate scientific backgrounds that allowed them to engage in convincing conversations with researchers about meteorological phenomena and climate research. This careful preparation enabled them to maintain their cover while systematically accessing the Institute's computer systems and research databases. The specific information that Team Aqua sought from the Weather Institute focused on several key areas that were directly relevant to their Kyogre awakening plan. Historical weather data going back several decades could potentially reveal patterns associated with legendary Pokémon activity, while current atmospheric monitoring capabilities would be essential for tracking the environmental changes that might accompany Kyogre's awakening. The Institute's research into extreme weather phenomena, including the formation and behavior of massive storm systems, provided valuable insights into the kind of atmospheric disturbances that Team Aqua might need to anticipate and prepare for during their operation. Perhaps most importantly, the Institute's experimental weather modification technology represented a potential tool that could be used to create or enhance the atmospheric conditions necessary for communicating with legendary Pokémon. While the technology was still in early development stages and had only been tested on small-scale weather systems, the theoretical principles underlying the research suggested that it might eventually be possible to influence larger atmospheric patterns in ways that could facilitate legendary Pokémon activity. The possibility of using this technology to create optimal conditions for awakening, Kyogre added another dimension to Team Aqua's strategic planning and provided additional justification for their infiltration of the facility. The discovery of cast form during their operation provided an unexpected bonus that demonstrated the value of their careful intelligence gathering approach. The unique weather-related abilities of this artificial Pokémon, created through the Institute's research into the relationships between atmospheric conditions and Pokémon behavior, offered potential applications for Team Aqua's mission that went far beyond simple weather monitoring. Castform's ability to change its form and capabilities in response to different weather conditions made it potentially valuable as both a reconnaissance tool and a means of communication with other weather-sensitive Pokémon species that might be affected by Kyogre's awakening. However, the operation at the Weather Institute was ultimately compromised by the same persistent trainer interference that had plagued Team Aqua's activities since their earliest operations. The unexpected arrival of the young trainer, who had consistently disrupted their previous missions, forced them to abandon their careful infiltration strategy and engage in direct confrontation that drew unwanted attention to their activities. The defeat of their operatives and the subsequent loss of access to the Institute's research facilities represented a significant setback for their information gathering efforts while also alerting law enforcement agencies to their interest in weather-related research and technology. Despite the operational failure, the intelligence gathered during their brief access to the Weather Institute's systems provided valuable insights that would inform Team Aqua's subsequent planning and preparation for their ultimate mission. The meteorological data they obtained helped them develop more sophisticated models of the atmospheric changes that might accompany Kyogre's awakening, while the research into weather modification technology provided new ideas about how they might enhance or direct the legendary Pokemon's influence over regional climate patterns. This information would prove particularly valuable during their later attempts to anticipate and manage the consequences of their actions. The escalation from the Weather Institute operation to the assault on Mount Pyre represented a crucial turning point in Team Aqua's campaign as they moved from intelligence gathering to the active pursuit of the artifacts that would be essential for their legendary Pokemon awakening plan. Mount Pyre's significance as a sacred site and repository for ancient artifacts had been established through their earlier research into Kyogre legends and the mountain's role as a spiritual center for Hoenn's indigenous traditions made it a natural location for preserving items of cosmic significance like the red and blue orbs. The decision to target Mount Pyre required Team Aqua to overcome both practical and ethical obstacles that tested their commitment to their mission in new ways. Unlike their previous targets, which had been either corporate facilities or research institutions with relatively secular purposes, Mount Pyre served as an active religious site where local communities came to honor their ancestors and maintain spiritual connections to the region's ancient traditions. The prospect of violating this sacred space and potentially disrupting important cultural practices created moral dilemmas that challenged some team members' comfort with their increasingly extreme methods. Archie's ability to maintain team cohesion during this morally complex operation demonstrated the depth of his charismatic influence and the strength of the ideological commitment he had built among his followers. He framed the Mount Pyre operation not as a violation of sacred traditions, but as a restoration of even more ancient spiritual connections between humanity and the ocean, arguing that the orbs rightfully belonged to those who understood their true purpose and could use them to restore the world's natural balance. This reframing allowed Team Aqua members to see themselves as spiritual guardians rather than sacrilegious thieves, maintaining their self-image as environmental protectors even as they engaged in increasingly questionable activities. The spiritual and psychological preparation for the Mount Pyre operation involved extensive research into the historical and mythological significance of the site, as Team Aqua members sought to understand the cultural context of their actions and develop appropriate rituals or ceremonies that might help them maintain spiritual harmony while pursuing their mission. This research revealed the deep connections between Mount Pyre's traditions and the ancient legends surrounding Kyogre and Groudon, suggesting that the local communities had preserved important knowledge about legendary Pokémon, even as the specific details of that knowledge had been lost or obscured over time. The actual assault on Mount Pyre was conducted with a combination of stealth and overwhelming force that reflected Team Aqua's growing military capabilities and their willingness to use violence when necessary to achieve their objectives. The mountain's remote location and the limited security presence at the sacred sites made it relatively easy for Team Aqua operatives to establish control over key areas, while the spiritual nature of the location meant that most visitors were elderly community members or religious practitioners who posed little physical threat to the well-trained and heavily armed infiltration teams. However, the operation was complicated by the unexpected presence of Team Magma operatives who had apparently arrived at Mount Pyre with similar objectives, creating a three-way conflict that involved not only the competition between the two rival organizations, but also the intervention of trainers and Pokémon who were determined to protect the sacred site from both groups of intruders. This complex tactical situation required rapid adaptation and creative problem-solving from both Matt and the field operatives, as they found themselves fighting on multiple fronts while trying to locate and secure the orbs that were essential to their mission. The discovery that Team Magma had already obtained one of the orbs while Team Aqua secured the other created a new strategic dynamic that would define the relationship between the two organizations for the remainder of their respective campaigns. The realization that both groups now possessed artifacts of legendary power while pursuing diametrically opposed goals raised the stakes of their conflict dramatically, transforming what had been a relatively minor rivalry into a potentially apocalyptic confrontation between competing visions of environmental restoration. Shelley's growing concerns about the wisdom and safety of Team Aqua's plans became more pronounced during and after the Mount Pyre operation, as the acquisition of the orb made their legendary Pokémon awakening plan seem suddenly more real and immediate. Her scientific training made her acutely aware of the risks associated with unleashing forces that might prove impossible to control, while her observations of the orb's properties and the reaction it produced in Team Aqua members suggested that the artifacts possessed influences that went beyond simple tools for communicating with legendary Pokémonde. The psychological impact of possessing one of the orbs created subtle but significant changes in Team Aqua's organizational dynamics and individual member behavior. The artifact seemed to enhance the oceanic obsessions and environmental passions that had motivated the organization's formation, while also creating a sense of urgency and destiny that made questioning or delaying their plans increasingly difficult. These effects were most pronounced in Archie himself, whose charismatic leadership began to take on almost messianic qualities, as he became convinced that he was destined to serve as the instrument of Kyogre's return and the restoration of oceanic dominance over the world. The acquisition of submarine technology had always been central to Team Aqua's ultimate plans, but the possession of the red orb transformed this operational necessity into an urgent imperative that consumed nearly all of their organizational resources and strategic thinking. Captain Stern's submarine project, which they had been monitoring through their intelligence networks for months, represented not just advanced underwater exploration capability, but the key that would unlock the deepest mysteries of the ocean and allow them to reach the legendary Pokémon whose awakening had become the singular focus of their existence. The submarine's sophisticated pressure resistance systems, advanced navigation equipment, and extended operational range made it uniquely suited for the kind of deep-sea exploration that would be necessary to locate and access the seafloor caverns where Kyogre was believed to rest. The decision to steal the submarine rather than attempting to build or purchase similar technology reflected both the urgency of Team Aqua's timeline and the complexity of the engineering challenges involved in creating such sophisticated underwater vehicles. Years of research and development had gone into Captain Stern's project, drawing on cutting-edge materials, science, advanced propulsion systems, and innovative life support technologies that would have been nearly impossible for Team Aqua to replicate independently. The theft would not only provide them with the vehicle they needed for their mission, but would also deny potential opponents access to technology that might be used to interfere with their plans or pursue competing agendas in the same underwater regions. Matt's role in planning and executing the submarine heist demonstrated his evolution from a simple enforcer to a sophisticated military strategist, capable of coordinating complex operations across multiple domains. The challenges of stealing a large submarine from a heavily secured facility while avoiding detection by both civilian law enforcement and potential military responders required careful analysis of security systems, precise timing of operational phases, and contingency planning for a wide range of potential complication. The operation would need to be completed quickly enough to prevent effective response from authorities, while also ensuring that the submarine remained functional and operational for their subsequent deep-sea mission. The public nature of Captain Stern's submarine demonstration in Slateport City provided both an opportunity and a challenge for Team Aqua's operational planning. The large crowds and media attention that surrounded the event created excellent cover for Team Aqua operatives to position themselves strategically around the harbor area without attracting suspicion, while also providing multiple escape routes and diversion opportunities that could be exploited if the operation encountered unexpected resistance. However, the same public visibility that facilitated their infiltration also meant that any violence or dramatic confrontation during the theft would likely be witnessed by numerous civilians and recorded by media outlets, potentially creating public relations problems that might complicate their future operations. Archie's decision to reveal himself publicly during the submarine theft reflected both his growing confidence in Team Aqua's capabilities and his desire to ensure that their environmental message reached the widest possible audience during this crucial phase of their campaign. Rather than conducting the operation covertly and maintaining the organization's previous preference for anonymous action, he chose to use the high-profile nature of the event as an opportunity to explain Team Aqua's mission and justify their increasingly extreme methods to the public. This strategic communication effort was designed to build popular support for their cause, while also serving notice to their opponents that Team Aqua had become a force capable of challenging even the most secure facilities and advanced technology. The confrontation with Captain Stern during the theft provided a poignant moment that illustrated the moral complexities underlying Team Aqua's mission as Archie found himself face to face with a fellow ocean enthusiast whose dedication to marine exploration and scientific advancement might have made him a natural ally under different circumstances. Stern's obvious passion for understanding and protecting ocean ecosystems created an uncomfortable parallel to Team Aqua's own environmental motivations, forcing Archie to confront the reality that their methods were alienating potential supporters who shared their fundamental concerns about marine conservation. However, Archie's commitment to his vision of oceanic restoration had become so absolute that even these moral complications could not deter him from pursuing the submarine that represented the final piece of his plan to awaken Kyogre. His ability to rationalize the theft as a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of marine ecosystems demonstrated the extent to which his environmental passion had evolved into something approaching religious fanaticism, where the ultimate goal of awakening the legendary Pokémon justified almost any intermediate action that might be required to achieve that objective. The successful acquisition of the submarine marked a turning point in Team Aqua's campaign that transformed them from environmental activists engaging in increasingly sophisticated criminal activities into a quasi-military organization possessing the technological capabilities necessary to challenge the fundamental natural order of the world. The submarine's advanced systems and extended operational range opened up vast areas of the ocean that had previously been inaccessible to human exploration, while also providing the means to reach the specific underwater locations where legendary Pokémon activity had been reported in ancient texts and modern scientific observation. The journey to the seafloor cavern represented the culmination of months of planning, preparation, and escalating criminal activity as Team Aqua finally possessed both the technological means and the mystical artifacts necessary to attempt their ultimate goal of awakening Kyogre. The submarine's descent into the deepest parts of Hoenn's ocean trenches carried with it the hopes and fears of every Team Aqua member, as they understood that the success or failure of this operation would determine not only the fate of their organization, but potentially the environmental future of the entire region. The underwater journey itself provided a profound spiritual experience for many Team Aqua members, as they found themselves traveling through aquatic realms that few humans had ever witnessed, and encountering marine life forms that existed in the planet's most remote and pristine environments. The bioluminescent creatures that populated the deep ocean trenches, the vast underwater mountain ranges that had never been mapped by surface explorers, and the alien-like ecosystems that thrived in the high-pressure darkness of the deep sea, all served to reinforce their conviction that the ocean represented a realm of wonder and wisdom that deserved protection from the destructive influence of surface-based civilization. The discovery of the seafloor cavern itself exceeded even Archie's most optimistic expectations, as the ancient underwater structure revealed clear evidence of legendary Pokémon activity and suggested that the site had served as a kind of sacred sanctuary for countless centuries. The cavern's massive scale, sophisticated architecture, and obvious artificial construction indicated that it had been created specifically to house and protect legendary Pokémon during their periods of dormancy, while the presence of ancient symbols and decorative elements suggested that previous civilizations had possessed knowledge about legendary Pokémon that had been lost to modern science and mythology. The approach to Kyogre's resting place within the deepest chambers of the cavern created an atmosphere of almost religious reverence among the Team Aqua operatives, as they found themselves in the presence of a creature whose power and significance exceeded anything they had previously imagined. The legendary Pokémon's massive form, even in its dormant state, radiated an aura of oceanic majesty that seemed to fill the entire cavern with the sound and sensation of distant waves and eternal tide. The experience of standing before Kyogre reinforced every Team Aqua member's conviction that they were participating in an event of cosmic significance that would reshape the relationship between humanity and the natural world. Archie's preparation for the awakening ritual reflected both his deep study of the ancient legends and his personal interpretation of the spiritual relationship between humanity and legendary Pokémonde. The ceremony he had developed combined elements from various mythological traditions with his own environmental philosophy, creating a unique blend of scientific understanding, religious devotion, and ecological activism that he believed would allow him to communicate effectively with Kyogre and direct its power toward the restoration of oceanic dominance over terrestrial environments. The moment of the orb's activation and Kyogre's subsequent awakening represented the culmination of everything Team Aqua had worked toward since their formation, but it also marked the beginning of a catastrophic series of events that would challenge every assumption underlying their environmental mission. The legendary Pokémon's response to the awakening ritual exceeded all of their expectations in terms of both power and independence, as Kyogre demonstrated immediately that its agenda and priorities were not necessarily aligned with human environmental goals, regardless of how well-intentioned or scientifically informed those goals might be. The initial moments of Kyogre's awakening filled the seafloor cavern with oceanic energy that seemed to pulse through the water itself, creating currents and pressure waves that threatened to damage the submarine and endanger the lives of every Team Aqua member present. The legendary Pokémon's massive form began to move with fluid grace that belied its enormous size, while its ancient eyes opened to reveal an intelligence that was both alien and profound, suggesting that Kyogre possessed knowledge and perspective that went far beyond anything that human science or mythology had been able to comprehend. Archie's attempts to communicate with the newly awakened Kyogre and establish some form of cooperative relationship quickly revealed the fundamental flaw in Team Aqua's planning, as the legendary Pokémon showed no interest in following human direction or limiting its power according to human environmental goals. The orb that had been essential for awakening Kyogre proved to be completely inadequate for controlling or directing its actions, serving instead as little more than a communication device that allowed the legendary Pokémon to sense human presence without necessarily creating any obligation to respond to human desires or instructions. The realization that Kyogre was acting according to its own agenda rather than Team Aqua's environmental vision created a moment of profound crisis for Archie and his followers, as they suddenly understood that their carefully planned operation had unleashed forces that might prove impossible to control or direct toward their intended objectives. The legendary Pokémon's departure from the seafloor cavern and its subsequent influence on regional weather patterns would soon demonstrate that the consequences of their actions extended far beyond anything they had anticipated or prepared for, transforming their dream of environmental restoration into a nightmare of ecological disruption. The psychological impact on Team Aqua, members of witnessing Kyogre's awakening and immediate demonstration of independence, created a complex mixture of awe, fear, and growing doubt that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying their mission. The legendary Pokémon's obvious power and majesty confirmed their belief in the cosmic significance of their actions, while its apparent indifference to human concerns raised troubling questions about whether their environmental goals could be achieved through legendary Pokémon intervention, or whether such intervention might actually make environmental problems worse rather than better. Shelley's scientific training made her particularly aware of the potential implications of Kyogre's uncontrolled activity as she began to calculate the possible consequences of unlimited oceanic expansion and weather modification on both marine and terrestrial ecosystems throughout the region. Her growing alarm at the scale and unpredictability of the changes that Kyogre might cause created the first serious challenge to Team Aqua's organizational unity as she began to question whether their actions had actually advanced their environmental mission or betrayed it by unleashing forces that could cause more ecological damage than the industrial activities they had been fighting. The emergence from the seafloor cavern into a world already beginning to show the effects of Kyogre's awakening provided Team Aqua with their first direct evidence of the scale and scope of the changes they had initiated. The intensification of rainfall, the rising sea levels, and the dramatic alterations in weather patterns that were already becoming apparent across Hoenn demonstrated that Kyogre's power extended far beyond the localized oceanic expansion that Team Aqua had anticipated, creating instead a regional climate crisis that threatened to disrupt every ecosystem in the area, regardless of whether those ecosystems were terrestrial or marine. The first sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong with Team Aqua's carefully planned environmental restoration came not from any single dramatic event, but from the gradual realization that the gentle rain they had initially welcomed as a sign of Kyogre's beneficial influence was intensifying into something far more ominous and uncontrollable. What had begun as refreshing showers that seemed to promise renewed life for drought-stricken coastal areas quickly transformed into relentless downpours that showed no signs of diminishing, with storm clouds gathering across the sky in patterns that defied all conventional meteorological understanding and suggested that the very atmospheric systems governing Hoenn's climate had been fundamentally altered by forces beyond human comprehension or control. Archie's initial response to these developments reflected the depth of his commitment to the vision that had driven Team Aqua's mission. As he struggled to interpret the increasingly severe weather as a necessary phase in Kyogre's restoration of oceanic dominance, rather than evidence that their plan had unleashed consequences they had never anticipated or prepared. For his attempts to maintain optimism and project confidence to his followers became increasingly strained as the rainfall intensified and the environmental changes began to take on clearly destructive characteristics that bore little resemblance to the harmonious oceanic paradise he had envisioned. The psychological impact on Team Aqua, members of witnessing the gap between their environmental dreams and the harsh reality of uncontrolled legendary Pokémon power, created profound internal conflicts that challenged every assumption underlying their mission and their understanding of their role in the natural world. The organization that had formed around the shared belief that they were protecting marine ecosystems from human destruction found themselves confronting the possibility that their actions had created a threat to all ecosystems that exceeded anything posed by the industrial activities they had spent years fighting against. Shelley's scientific training made her among the first to recognize the full implications of what was happening, as her understanding of atmospheric and oceanic systems allowed her to calculate the potential consequences of the weather patterns that were beginning to establish themselves across the region. Her attempts to document and analyze the changes provided increasingly alarming evidence that Kyogre's influence was creating feedback loops within Hoenn's climate system that could lead to permanent alterations in temperature, precipitation, and ocean circulation patterns that would affect every living creature in the region for generations to come. The rising sea levels that accompanied the intensifying rainfall created immediate and visible threats to coastal communities that had supported Team Aqua's environmental mission, as the very people whose traditional livelihoods depended on healthy marine ecosystems found their homes and businesses threatened by the expanding ocean that Team Aqua had sought to restore. The irony of this situation was not lost on Team Aqua members, who watched in growing horror as their attempt to protect ocean life resulted in the displacement of the human communities that had been the strongest advocates for marine conservation. The flooding of low-lying coastal areas proceeded with inexorable persistence that made it clear that this was not a temporary weather event, but rather a fundamental transformation of Hoenn's geography and ecosystem boundaries. Traditional fishing villages that had existed for generations found themselves partially or completely submerged, while important agricultural areas that supported both human communities and terrestrial Pokémon habitats disappeared beneath the rising waters. The environmental destruction that Team Aqua had sought to prevent was now being caused by their own actions, creating a moral crisis that challenged the very foundation of their organizational identity. Matt's practical nature and tactical expertise made him particularly aware of the immediate dangers that the changing conditions posed to Team Aqua's operational capabilities and member safety, as the increasingly severe weather made maritime operations both more dangerous and less effective. The organization that had prided itself on its seamanship and ability to operate in challenging oceanic conditions found their skills inadequate for dealing with the supernatural storm systems and unpredictable sea states that resulted from Kyogre's influence on regional weather patterns. The attempts to maintain contact with Kyogre and establish some form of communication or influence over the legendary Pokemon's activities proved completely futile, as the creature demonstrated no interest in human concerns or environmental goals beyond its own incomprehensible agenda. The red orb that had been essential for awakening Kyogre continued to react to the legendary Pokemon's presence and activity, but provided no means for directing or limiting its power, serving instead as a constant reminder of the forces that Team Aqua had unleashed but could not control. The realization that their environmental mission had transformed into an environmental catastrophe created deep philosophical and emotional crises for individual Team Aqua members, many of whom had joined the organization out of genuine love for marine life and concern for ocean ecosystems. The knowledge that their actions were causing exactly the kind of ecological disruption they had dedicated their lives to preventing created psychological burdens that many found impossible to bear, leading to defections, nervous breakdowns, and desperate attempts to find ways to undo or mitigate the damage they had caused. The collapse of Team Aqua's operational effectiveness in the face of the crisis they had created was accelerated by the growing recognition that their organizational structure and capabilities had been designed for conducting targeted operations against specific industrial threats rather than managing the consequences of global environmental changes. The skills and resources that had made them effective environmental activists and criminal operatives proved largely irrelevant when confronted with the need to address climate disruption on a scale that exceeded the capacity of any non-governmental organization to influence or control. The discovery that Team Magma had successfully awakened Groudon and that the legendary Pokemon's power was creating equally severe but opposite environmental effects added another dimension of complexity and horror to the situation. That Team Aqua found themselves confronting the prospect that two opposing legendary forces were now active simultaneously and potentially interacting in unpredictable ways raised the possibility that Hoenn's entire ecosystem could be destroyed by the conflict between oceanic and terrestrial powers that neither organization could direct or contain. The meeting between Archie and Maxie in the midst of the climate crisis that their respective organizations had created provided a moment of terrible clarity about the consequences of their environmental extremism and the fundamental flaws in their approach to protecting natural ecosystems. The two leaders, who had spent years viewing each other as enemies, found themselves united by their shared horror at what they had unleashed and their mutual recognition that their ideological differences had become irrelevant in the face of a crisis that threatened to destroy everything they had claimed to be protecting. The sight of Kyogre and Groudon engaged in direct conflict provided a spectacle of legendary power that exceeded anything described in ancient myths or modern scientific speculation, as the two massive creatures fought with abilities that seemed to reshape reality itself around them. The battle between oceanic and terrestrial forces created environmental conditions so extreme that they threatened to make large portions of Hoenn uninhabitable for both human and Pokémon populations, while the collateral damage from their conflict began to affect weather patterns and geological stability across the entire region. Archie's personal crisis during this period reflected not only his growing awareness of the catastrophic consequences of his actions, but also his profound sense of betrayal by the oceanic forces he had devoted his life to serving and protecting. The realization that Kyogre's agenda bore no relationship to his environmental vision, and that the legendary Pokémon was capable of causing as much ecological destruction as any human industrial activity, challenged every assumption that had motivated his transformation from environmental activist to criminal mastermind. The attempts by both Team Aqua and Team Magma to regain control over their respective legendary Pokémon proved pathetically inadequate when compared to the scale of the forces they were trying to influence, as their orbs and organizational resources provided no meaningful leverage against creatures whose power transcended human understanding or control. The organizations that had spent years developing sophisticated capabilities or conducting complex criminal operations found themselves reduced to desperate and futile gestures in the face of consequences that exceeded their ability to comprehend or address. The intervention of trainers and their Pokémon in the crisis created additional complications for Team Aqua's attempts to understand and respond to the situation, as the persistent interference that had plagued their operations throughout their campaign continued even in the face of global environmental catastrophe. The young trainer who had consistently disrupted their activities now appeared to be working toward some kind of solution to the legendary Pokémon conflict, raising questions about whether there might be approaches to the crisis that Team Aqua had not considered, or capabilities that they had underestimated. The growing recognition that their environmental mission had been fundamentally misguided created profound identity crises for Team Aqua members, who had to confront the possibility that their years of criminal activity and moral compromise had not only failed to protect marine ecosystems, but had actually created threats to those ecosystems that exceeded anything they had been fighting against. The knowledge that their sincere environmental concerns had been channeled into actions that caused environmental destruction challenged their understanding of their own motivations and raised disturbing questions about the relationship between good intentions and beneficial outcomes. The psychological pressure of witnessing the destruction caused by their actions while being completely powerless to stop or control it created conditions within Team Aqua that led to the rapid breakdown of organizational discipline and cohesion. Members who had maintained loyalty and dedication through years of increasingly dangerous and morally questionable activities found themselves unable to cope with the reality that their ultimate success had resulted in their ultimate failure, leading to widespread desertion, emotional collapse, and desperate attempts to distance themselves from the organization and its consequences. The realization that the ancient legends describing Kyogre's power had been accurate in their warnings about the destructive potential of legendary Pokémon awakening provided a bitter lesson about the importance of understanding traditional knowledge and respecting the wisdom embedded in cultural practices that Team Aqua had dismissed as primitive superstition. The myths that had inspired their mission contained warnings about the dangers of legendary Pokémon intervention that they had ignored in their enthusiasm for oceanic restoration, leading to exactly the kind of catastrophic consequences that the ancient stories had been designed to prevent. As the crisis deepened and the environmental destruction continued to accelerate, Team Aqua members found themselves confronting the fundamental question of whether their organization had any continuing purpose or relevance in a world where their primary accomplishment had been to create the very kind of ecological disaster they had formed to prevent. The skills, knowledge, and capabilities they had developed for environmental activism seemed pathetically inadequate for addressing the consequences of their actions, while their criminal activities had eliminated any possibility of working within legal and political systems to promote environmental protection. The moment when Rayquaza descended from the sky to intervene in the battle between Kyogre and Groudon provided Team Aqua with their first glimpse of hope that the catastrophic situation they had created might somehow be resolved, though the arrival of this third legendary Pokémon also served as a profound reminder of how little they had understood about the forces they had chosen to manipulate. The ancient dragon's ability to calm both Kyogre and Groudon and restore some semblance of balance to Hoenn's devastated climate demonstrated that there were powers and relationships within the natural world that transcended human comprehension, while also highlighting the arrogance and ignorance that had characterized Team Aqua's approach to environmental protection. Archie's reaction to witnessing Rayquaza's intervention reflected the complete transformation of his worldview that had been occurring throughout the crisis, as he began to understand that his vision of oceanic restoration had been based on fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of environmental balance and the role that legendary Pokémon played in maintaining the stability of natural systems. The realization that Kyogre's power required external regulation and that the legendary Pokémon was not inherently committed to creating the harmonious oceanic paradise he had imagined forced him to confront the possibility that his entire environmental philosophy had been built on romantic fantasies rather than scientific understanding. The process of coming to terms with the magnitude of his mistakes and their consequences proved to be one of the most psychologically challenging experiences of Archie's life, as he was forced to acknowledge that his passionate commitment to protecting marine ecosystems had led him to cause exactly the kind of environmental destruction he had dedicated years of his life to preventing. The knowledge that his sincere environmental concerns had been channeled into actions that threatened the very creatures and habitats he had sought to protect created a crisis of identity and purpose that challenged every assumption he had made about himself and his mission. The decision to disband Team Aqua was not made lightly or quickly, but rather emerged gradually from the recognition that the organization's fundamental premises and methods had been so thoroughly discredited by recent events that continuing to operate under the same banner would serve no constructive purpose. The bonds of loyalty and shared commitment that had held the organization together through years of increasingly dangerous and morally questionable activities, proved insufficient to survive the realization that their ultimate success had resulted in their ultimate failure as environmental protectors. Shelley's role in facilitating the organization's peaceful dissolution reflected both her scientific understanding of the situation and her ability to help other team members process the psychological and emotional implications of what had occurred. Her expertise in marine ecology provided a framework for understanding how the events they had witnessed fit into larger patterns of environmental change and ecosystem dynamics, while her personal relationships with other team members allowed her to provide the kind of emotional support that was necessary for individuals who were struggling to come to terms with the consequences of their actions. The practical challenges of dismantling an organization that had spent years developing sophisticated criminal capabilities and maintaining secret facilities proved to be considerable, requiring careful coordination to ensure that sensitive information and dangerous equipment did not fall into the wrong hands, while also protecting former members from potential legal consequences for their past activities. The process of securing or destroying their accumulated resources while protecting the safety and future prospects of individual team members required the same kind of careful planning and execution that had characterized their most successful operations. Matt's expertise in security and tactical operations proved invaluable during the disbandment process, as his understanding of law enforcement capabilities and investigative procedures allowed him to develop strategies for minimizing the legal exposure of former Team Aqua members while ensuring that their criminal activities would not continue to pose threats to public safety. His practical approach to problem solving helped the organization navigate the complex challenges of transitioning from an active criminal enterprise to a dissolved group of individuals seeking to rebuild their lives and find constructive ways to address their environmental concerns. The return of the red orb to Mount Pyre represented both a practical necessity and a symbolic act of restitution that helped former Team Aqua members begin the process of making amends for the violations of sacred traditions and cultural practices that their organization had committed in pursuit of their environmental goals. The ceremony surrounding the orb's return was conducted with the kind of respect and reverence that had been absent from their original theft, reflecting their growing understanding of the importance of traditional knowledge and cultural wisdom in maintaining healthy relationships between human communities and natural environments. The conversations between Archie and the spiritual leaders at Mount Pyre provided opportunities for him to begin understanding how his environmental passion might be channeled into more constructive activities that respected both natural systems and human communities, rather than attempting to impose idealistic visions through force and manipulation. The elder's willingness to accept his sincere repentance while also helping him understand the broader implications of his actions demonstrated the kind of wisdom and forgiveness that would be necessary for healing the damage that Team Aqua had caused to both environmental and social relationships throughout the region. The individual paths taken by former Team Aqua members after the organization's dissolution reflected the diverse backgrounds and motivations that had originally brought them together, as well as their varying abilities to process and learn from the traumatic experiences they had shared. Some members chose to continue working in environmental fields, but through legitimate organizations and legal methods, while others decided to distance themselves completely from environmental activism and pursue entirely different careers and life directions. The psychological healing process for former Team Aqua members proved to be lengthy and complex, requiring them to confront not only the immediate trauma of witnessing environmental catastrophe, but also the deeper questions about identity, purpose, and moral responsibility that arose from their recognition that well-intentioned actions could produce destructive consequences. Many former members sought counseling or therapy to help them process their experiences and develop healthier approaches to environmental activism that did not involve the kind of extremism and criminal behavior that had characterized their time with Team Aqua. Archie's personal journey toward redemption involved not only accepting responsibility for the consequences of his leadership, but also working to understand the deeper psychological and philosophical factors that had led him to embrace such extreme methods in pursuit of his environmental goals. His willingness to engage in honest self-reflection and to seek guidance from individuals with different perspectives on environmental issues demonstrated a fundamental change in his approach to leadership and decision-making that offered hope for his ability to contribute positively to environmental protection efforts in the future. The impact of Team Aqua's dissolution on the broader environmental movement in Hoenn was complex and multifaceted, as their spectacular failure served as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of extremism and a reminder of the urgent need for effective approaches to addressing environmental challenges. Some environmental groups distanced themselves from Team Aqua's methods and rhetoric, while others sought to learn from their mistakes and develop more sophisticated understanding of the relationships between environmental activism, scientific knowledge, and political change. The restoration of Hoenn's climate and ecosystem stability following Rayquaza's intervention provided evidence that natural systems possessed resilience and self-healing capabilities that exceeded human understanding, while also demonstrating the importance of respecting natural processes rather than attempting to manipulate them according to human preferences. The gradual return to normal weather patterns and the recovery of damaged habitats offered hope that the environmental destruction caused by the legendary Pokémon conflict could be overcome through time and careful stewardship. The lessons learned from Team Aqua's rise and fall contributed to important changes in how environmental organizations throughout the region approached their work, with increased emphasis on scientific rigor, community engagement, and respect for traditional knowledge systems that had previously been dismissed as irrelevant to modern environmental challenges. The recognition that passionate commitment to environmental protection could lead to environmental destruction, if not properly guided by wisdom and humility, became an important theme in environmental education and activism throughout Hoenn. The ongoing monitoring of Kyogre's status and the development of early warning systems for future legendary Pokémon activity became important priorities for government agencies and research institutions that recognized the need to be prepared for similar situations in the future. The knowledge gained from Team Aqua's experiences provided valuable insights into the capabilities and limitations of human technology and organization when confronted with forces of legendary magnitude, leading to more realistic assessments of both the possibilities and dangers associated with legendary Pokémon interaction. The memorial services held for the communities and ecosystems that had been damaged or destroyed during the crisis provided opportunities for former Team Aqua members to participate in collective grieving and healing processes that help them begin to transform their guilt and regret into constructive commitment to preventing similar tragedies in the future. The recognition that environmental activism required not only passion and dedication, but also wisdom, humility, and respect for the complexity of natural systems became a central theme in these commemorative activities. Archie's eventual decision to dedicate his remaining years to supporting legitimate environmental research and education efforts reflected his understanding that meaningful environmental protection required long-term commitment to building knowledge and understanding, rather than seeking dramatic shortcuts through manipulation of forces beyond human control. His willingness to work quietly and without recognition in support of causes he had once sought to advance through criminal activity demonstrated the depth of his personal transformation and his genuine commitment to making amends for the damage his organization had caused. The story of Team Aqua's rise and fall offers profound insights into the delicate equilibrium that governs all natural systems, revealing how even the most sincere environmental passions can become destructive when they lose sight of the fundamental interconnectedness that binds all living creatures together in webs of mutual dependence and shared vulnerability. Water, which Team Aqua had revered as the source of all life and the embodiment of natural harmony, proved to be equally capable of destruction when allowed to expand beyond the boundaries that maintain ecological stability, demonstrating that the very forces they had sought to unleash as agents of environmental restoration could become instruments of environmental devastation if not properly understood and respected. The ocean's role in supporting life extends far beyond simply providing habitat for marine creatures, encompassing complex relationships with atmospheric systems, terrestrial watersheds, and global climate patterns that influence the health and stability of every ecosystem on the planet. The interconnected nature of these systems means that dramatic changes in oceanic conditions inevitably create cascading effects that ripple through all other environmental domains, affecting not only the marine life that Team Aqua had sought to protect, but also the terrestrial and atmospheric systems that support the complete web of life that makes up Earth's biosphere. The wisdom embedded in ancient mythologies and traditional knowledge systems becomes apparent when viewed through the lens of Team Aqua's experiences, as the stories that had inspired their mission contained warnings about the dangers of legendary Pokémon awakening that they had dismissed as primitive superstition, rather than recognizing as accumulated wisdom about the proper relationships between human ambition and natural forces. The myths describing the conflicts between Kyogre and Groudon were not simply entertaining stories, but rather cultural memories of actual environmental catastrophes that had taught previous generations about the importance of maintaining balance and respecting the boundaries that separate beneficial intervention from destructive manipulation. The concept of environmental stewardship that emerges from reflection on Team Aqua's journey emphasizes the importance of working with natural systems rather than attempting to control or redirect them according to human preferences, recognizing that the complexity and interconnectedness of ecological relationships exceed human understanding and require approaches based on humility and respect rather than technological arrogance and ideological certainty. True environmental protection requires not only scientific knowledge and passionate commitment, but also the wisdom to recognize the limitations of human perspective and the dangers of pursuing even beneficial goals through methods that ignore the fundamental principles governing natural systems. The relationship between human communities and natural environments reveals itself to be far more complex and nuanced than Team Aqua's simple vision of oceanic restoration had acknowledged, involving intricate balances between conservation and development, protection and utilization that cannot be resolved through dramatic interventions, but rather require ongoing negotiation and careful management based on deep understanding of both ecological and social dynamics. The coastal communities that Team Aqua had sought to protect from industrial development were themselves part of the marine ecosystems they inhabited, with traditional practices and cultural knowledge that contributed to environmental health in ways that pure preservation or restoration efforts could not replicate. The danger of environmental extremism becomes clear when examining how Team Aqua's legitimate concerns about marine conservation were gradually transformed into an obsession with oceanic dominance that lost sight of the broader ecological relationships that their actions would inevitably affect. The polarization between oceanic and terrestrial perspectives that drove the conflict between Team Aqua and Team Magma reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of how natural systems actually function, where the health of marine environments depends on complex interactions with land-based watersheds, atmospheric systems, and the countless species that move between different ecological domains throughout their life cycles. The role of legendary Pokémon in maintaining natural balance suggests that these creatures serve as guardians of fundamental forces that require external regulation and oversight, rather than simple activation or awakening, with Rayquaza's intervention demonstrating that even the most powerful natural forces must be subject to checks and balances that prevent any single element from overwhelming the others. The ancient wisdom that created systems for keeping legendary Pokémon dormant was not based on fear or ignorance, but rather on deep understanding of the catastrophic consequences that could result from unleashing forces that exceed the capacity of any single perspective or agenda to control or direct. The healing process that followed the legendary Pokémon crisis provides insights into the resilience of natural systems and their capacity for recovery when given appropriate time and conditions, while also demonstrating the importance of human restraint and humility in allowing those healing processes to occur without interference or premature intervention. The gradual restoration of Hoen's climate and ecosystems revealed that nature possesses self-regulating mechanisms that can address even massive disruptions if they are not continually aggravated by misguided human attempts to accelerate or control the recovery process. The transformation of individual Team Aqua members from environmental extremists to constructive contributors to legitimate conservation efforts illustrates the possibility of channeling passionate environmental concern into activities that respect both natural systems and human communities, while also demonstrating the importance of institutional frameworks and cultural wisdom in guiding environmental activism toward beneficial rather than destructive outcomes. The skills and knowledge that Team Aqua members had developed during their criminal activities proved to be valuable assets for legitimate environmental work when combined with proper ethical guidance and scientific understanding. The broader implications of Team Aqua's story for environmental policy and activism emphasize the need for approaches that integrate scientific knowledge, traditional wisdom, and community engagement, rather than relying on technological solutions or ideological commitments that ignore the complexity of ecological and social relationships. Effective environmental protection requires not only identifying and addressing specific threats, but also understanding and strengthening the broader systems of relationships that maintain environmental health and resilience over time. The legacy of Team Aqua's experiences contributes to ongoing discussions about the proper relationship between human ambition and natural systems, highlighting the importance of developing environmental philosophies and practices that acknowledge both the urgent need for environmental protection and the dangers of pursuing that protection through methods that ignore ecological complexity and social context. The recognition that good intentions are insufficient to guarantee beneficial outcomes has become an important theme in environmental education and policy development throughout the region. The continuing presence of legendary Pokémon in the world serves as a reminder that there are forces and relationships within natural systems that exceed human understanding and control, requiring approaches to environmental stewardship that emphasize respect, humility, and careful observation, rather than confident intervention based on limited knowledge or partial perspectives. The ability of these creatures to shape entire ecosystems and climate systems demonstrates both the power and the responsibility that comes with environmental influence, whether that influence is wielded by legendary Pokémon or by human organizations seeking to protect or restore natural systems. The peaceful coexistence of land and sea that characterizes Hoen's current environmental stability depends on maintaining the complex balances and relationships that prevent any single element from overwhelming the others, requiring ongoing attention to the subtle interactions between oceanic and terrestrial systems, rather than dramatic interventions designed to favor one domain over another. The health of marine ecosystems depends not only on the protection of oceanic habitats, but also on the maintenance of healthy watersheds. Sustainable coastal development and atmospheric conditions that support the full range of species and ecological processes that make up the region's environmental integrity. The wisdom gained from Team Aqua's experiences emphasizes the importance of approaching environmental challenges with both urgency and patience, recognizing that the threats facing natural systems require immediate attention, while also understanding that effective solutions must be developed through careful study, community engagement, and respect for the complex relationships that govern ecological health and stability. The balance between action and restraint, intervention and respect, protection and utilization requires ongoing navigation based on deep understanding of both natural systems and human communities, rather than simple adherence to ideological principles or technological capabilities. As our journey through Team Aqua's story draws to a close, let yourself drift back to this quiet moment, feeling the gentle rhythm of your breathing like the eternal tides that shape distant shores. The tale of passionate environmentalists who lost their way serves as a peaceful reminder that even in our mistakes and misunderstandings, there exists the possibility of redemption and wisdom gained through experience. Picture yourself now beside calm waters where the moonlight creates silver pathways across the surface, where the soft lapping of waves against smooth stones creates a natural lullaby that has soothed countless generations before you. The ocean's endless depths hold mysteries we may never fully understand, just as the natural world continues to surprise and humble us with its complexity and resilience. In this tranquil space between waking and sleeping, you can let go of the day's concerns and allow yourself to be carried by the same forces that guide migrating Pokémon across vast oceanic distances, trusting in currents older than human memory. As Team Aqua's members found peace in letting go of their need to control the sea, you too can release control and simply be present with the gentle flow of rest that awaits you. Let the story fade now, like foam dissolving on a peaceful beach, leaving only the soothing sound of waves and the promise of restful dreams beneath starlit skies.